First position is precious for everyone. But have you ever noticed something happened last? Something very important? Here, you can watch some incidents which may happen last in our history. Dodo, the extinct bird. The dodo was a medium large-sized flightless bird that was discovered on the island of Mauritius in the 1590s and was declared extinct less than a century later in 1681. Despite the turkey-sized body of the dodo, it is thought to have been most closely related to smaller birds such as doves and pigeons. The dodo inhabited the tropical forest on the tiny islands of Mauritius that is situated in the Indian Ocean. In its native forest on the island of Mauritius, the dodo had no natural predators until humans landed at the end of the 16th century. But it wasn't just the humans that hunted this friendly and docile bird. The dodo, along with their nest, were hunted in the following years by sailors and invasive species while its habitat was being destroyed. The last widely accepted sighting of a dodo was in 1662. The last sighting of a dodo was in 1662. Tasmanian tiger or thylacines. Tasmanian tiger, also known as Tasmanian wolves or thylacines. Although scientists generally believe that the species went extinct in 1936, people still report sightings of odd animals resembling Tasmanian tigers. As of yet, though no conclusive proof exists. Tasmanian tiger, commonly known as the Tasmanian tiger because of its striped lower back, or the Tasmanian wolf, native to continental Australia, Tasmania and New Guinea, is believed to have become extinct in the 20th century. Scientists believe that Tasmanian tigers were hunted and killed by humans. The last remaining live specimen turned out to be Benjamin, a Tasmanian tiger held in a zoo in its native Tasmania. By the time Benjamin was in the zoo, the Tasmanian government finally came to its senses and passed legislation protecting Tasmanian tigers. It came too late, though just 59 days after the legislation was signed into law, a neglectful zookeeper locked Benjamin out of his sheltered area on a cold night, and the last Tasmanian tiger died of exposure. The Berlin Wall, guarded concrete curtain divided Berlin. The Berlin Wall was a guarded concrete barrier that physically and ideologically divided Berlin from 1961 to 1989. The barrier included guard towers placed along large concrete walls, accompanied by a wide area, later known as the Death Strip, that contained anti-vehicle trenches and other defenses. Constructed by the German Democratic Republic starting on 13 August 1961, the wall cut off West Berlin from virtually all of surrounding East Germany and East Berlin until government officials opened it in November 1989. Its demolition officially began on 13 June 1990 and finished in 1992. Berlin Wall's demolition officially began on 13 June 1990 and finished in 1992. Eugene Cernan, the last person who walked on the moon. Eugene Andrew Cernan was an American astronaut, naval aviator, electrical engineer, aeronautical engineer, and fighter pilot. During the Apollo 17 mission, Cernan became the 11th person to walk on the moon. Since he re-entered the lunar module after his Harrison Smith on their third and final lunar excursion, he is the last person who have walked on the moon. Cernan traveled into space 3 times as pilot of Gemini 9A in June 1966, as lunar module pilot of Apollo 10 in May 1969, and as commander of Apollo 17 in December 1972, the final Apollo lunar landing. Cernan was also a backup crew member of the Gemini 12, Apollo 7, and Apollo 14 space missions. Godspeed the crew of Apollo 17, Cernan's status as the last person to walk on the moon. Gladiators, the last non-gladiatorial fight. A gladiator was an armed combatant who entertained audiences in the Roman Republic and Roman Empire in his violent confrontations with other gladiators, wild animals, and condemned criminals. Some gladiators were volunteers who risked their lives and their legal and social standing by appearing in the arena. Most were despised as slaves, schooled under harsh conditions, socially marginalized, and segregated even in death. Saint Telemachus, who was a monk, according to the church historian Theodoret, tried to stop a gladiatorial fight in a Roman amphitheater and was stoned to death by the crowd. The Christian emperor Honorius, however, was impressed by the monk's martyrdom and spurred him to issue a historic ban on the gladiatorial fights. The last non-gladiatorial fight in Rome was on 1st January 404 AD. The last non-gladiatorial fight in Rome was on 1st January 404 AD. The Ford Model T, most influential car of the 20th century. The Ford Model T is an automobile produced by Ford Motor Company from October 1, 1908 to May 26, 1927. It is generally regarded as the first affordable automobile, the car that opened travel to the common middle-class American. Some of this was because of Ford's efficient fabrication, including assembly line production instead of individual handcrafting. Ford's Model T was successful not only because it provided inexpensive transportation on a massive scale, but also because the car signified innovation for the rising middle class and became a powerful symbol of America's age of modernization. The Ford Model T was named the most influential car of the 20th century in the 1999 Car of the Century competition. Henry Ford believed the Model T was all the car a person would or could ever need. As other companies offered comfort and styling advantages at competitive prices, the Model T lost market share. Design changes were not as few as the public perceived, but the idea of an unchanging model was kept intact. Eventually, on May 26, 1927, Ford Motor Company ceased US production and began the changeovers required to produce the Model A. On May 26, 1927, Ford Motor Company ceased the Ford Model T US production after a long race. World Wars, Tears of the 20th Century. World War I began in 1914 after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and lasted until 1918. During the conflict, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire, the Central Powers, fought against Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Romania, Japan, and the United States. World War I was a global war originating in Europe that lasted from 28 July 1914 to 11 November 1918, contemporaneously described as the war to end all wars. More than 70 million military personnel, including 60 million Europeans, were mobilized in one of the largest wars in history. Over 9 million combatants and 7 million civilians died as a result of the war, including the victims of a number of genocides. A casualty rate exacerbated by the belligerents' technological and industrial sophistication and the tactical stalemate caused by grueling trench warfare. It was one of the deadliest conflicts in history and precipitated major political change, including the revolutions of 1917 to 1923 in many of the nations involved. Unresolved rivalries at the end of the conflict contributed to the start of the Second World War, 21 years later. World War II. World War II, also known as the Second World War, was a global war that lasted from 1939 to 1945. Although conflicts reflecting the ideological clash between what would become the Allied and Axis blocs began earlier. The vast majority of the world's countries, including all of the great powers, eventually formed two opposing military alliances, the Allies and the Axis. It was the most global war in history. It directly involved more than 100 million people from over 30 countries. In a state of total war, the major participants threw their entire economic, industrial, and scientific capabilities behind the war effort, blurring the distinction between civilian and military resources. World War II was the deadliest conflict in human history, marked by 50 to 85 million fatalities, most of which were civilians in the Soviet Union and China. It included massacre, the genocide of the Holocaust, strategic bombing, premeditated death, starvation and disease, and the only use of nuclear weapon in the war. German surrender to the Allies took place in late April and early May 1945. The end of World War II in Asia occurred 14 and 15 August 1945. There are more interesting facts awaiting. I'll come back with that in next episode. Till then, bye.